Welcome to I Like Beer, the book club, where we discuss great books while drinking beer. That's it. Beer and a book and a couple of friends. I'm your host, Jeff Spanier. With me is the co-host of I Like Beer, the podcast, affectionately nicknamed The Talent, Jeff Riccitelli.
All right. Excited to be back. Ready for another book.
Me too. And our book and beer friend author, Ryan Woldt.
I am excited to be back as well. I have not read any Steinbeck before today or before this month. So this is all new to me.
Yeah. You said that, and I was so surprised by that, but then I realized maybe Steinbeck's a California thing.
You know, it feels like a name that I've always known. I don't feel like it was ever part of any English literature classes I took, even through college, for whatever reason. I mean, maybe there's two tracks. There's a Steinbeck track and a non-Steinbeck track.
Yeah, okay.
And I was on the wrong one.
Oh, possibly. Did you read a lot of Jane Eyre?
A lot of Jane Eyre.
Okay. Yeah, that was the other track.
A lot of Jane Eyre, a lot of Dickens.
Yeah, that is a different track and a very different style of writing, which we'll get into, as this is very not Dickens.
I think we had to read all of the Canterbury Tales one semester. Yeah, I mean, we were definitely...
That's standard fare, yep.
We were going down, we were real into the Brits.
On the I Like Beer, the podcast, we've been discussing how excited we are to get back to some of our local favorite breweries and reconnect with friends we made during our first year of podcasting that we feel in some ways got kind of torn away from us over the last year. But we've been talking about that, and we're excited to head back out now that we're vaccinated and things are looking like more of a safe opening this time. What have you been up to, Ryan?
I actually made my first trip out to a store, like where I went inside with no like plan. I didn't pre-order anything. I just went out, and the whole thing just seemed surreal. And of course, because it was a liquor store, because it just made sense, I had to buy beer for this show. Everything went great, and then of course I couldn't remember. After a year and a half, I couldn't remember my rewards club card, and it turned into a whole thing. But I survived, and I have beer for the show.
Nice.
Excellent. We'll get to that in a moment. Tell people where they can find you.
Oh, boy. Well, right now I'm in my bedroom, guys. In general, I'm in the house. No, you can find me at One Wildlife Co. on every social media. You can find me at Roast West Coast, which is my coffee thing. There's just so much stuff. I'm just going to link to it in the show notes.
All right. Jeff and I bonded years ago over our fondness for craft beer and telling stories. In fact, we spent an awful lot of time drinking beer and talking about books. Thought we were the only ones. Then we met Ryan, learned there was at least one more kindred soul. We figured there must be somebody else out there, so we created I Like Beer, the book club. Once a month, we join powers to discuss a book and share a beer, rotating the host based on who has chosen the book. My turn again. So we have returned to a favorite classic reread of mine. About every 10 years, I put my nose back in this book, John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. But before we turn the first page, let's find out what we're drinking. And so, Ryan, you went out to a liquor store. What'd you come back with?
I did. I wanted to be inspired by the book a little bit more about geography, maybe, than the book or the type of beer that Doc was drinking at the time. So I was looking for something up north, and I found this great 6-pack from Fort Point Brewing up near where this book takes place. Except when I looked at the bottom of the can, it looked like it had a born-on date of early 2020. So I left it there on the shelf. And then I thought, okay, well, he was also down here in La Jolla at points in the book. So I decided to split the difference. And I found, I grabbed an Artifex Trigger Finger IPA, which is a classic IPA from San Clemente. And one I have not had in over a year. So I'm real excited to try it out today.
Excellent. Looking forward to hearing about it. And Jeff, what did you pick up for today?
So I kind of did the same thing, geographically speaking. But then I figured out I failed on that because I said, well, I'm going to go Central California 805. But it stops right at Salinas is where 805 area code stops. So I needed 831. Didn't find that beer. But he did drive through the Central Valley area, Paso Robles, all that area down in order to get to La Jolla. So I went California. California area code, Central Coast.
I went
I
more.
thought the other sorry to interrupt you there, Jeff. I thought the other option would have been to try to get a beer that I thought Doc would be drinking.
Right.
And so I did have a Miller High Life 6-pack in my cart for a while, but I ended up leaving it behind.
There you go.
That's what I did. I like, well, what would Mac and the boys? They'd drink anything that was available.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was looking for just like a classic lager. And I'm like, okay, they drink anything they could get their hands on. Let me dig to the very back of the fridge, see what's like laying on its side. And then if I had a lager, I'm going for it. And I found just a classic golden lager by Four Peaks Brewing, which was part of our trip. So I'm like, that works. That works. So it was really, what I really wanted was a jug of mixed booze, but then I knew I wouldn't get very far. It was a favorite drink of some of the characters in the, I don't know, favorite or even preferred, but it's what they got.
It's the drink of choice.
You need to explain what you mean by that. Some people might not have read this book.
Yeah, so they're Mac and the boys. We'll get to who they are. They'll pretty much drink whatever they can get their hands on, and some of them will work part-time as a bartender and fill a jug full of odds and ends, unfinished drinks all night long, and then bring that jug back to their flop house, and that's the winning jug.
You never know what you're gonna get.
Well, cheers.
Cheers to you guys.
But Jeff, you've read some Steinbeck before.
I did. I know it was funny because I tried to I thought I had read this book, but then as I got going on, I realized I hadn't read it. East of Eden, I read that one. Actually, you recommended a couple of summers ago. So I read that, probably within the last 5 years, and enjoyed that one. And then I was going through, I believe I way back when read Tortilla Flat, which takes place in a similar, it's another area of the Monterey Peninsula and stuff like that. But I feel like now after reading this, and I'm gonna have to go back and re-hit some of those and freshen them up, because I honestly, I couldn't tell you much about the book because if I read it, it's been that long.
Right. Tortilla Flat's an interesting one. It's sort of a retelling of the King Arthur, the Round Table stories through the migrant workers lens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Steinbeck was a King Arthur fan.
Right.
He rewrote many of those classic stories.
Yeah. And I think at East of Eden, every time I'm driving up the 5 and going through the San Joaquin Valley, because it's all that area, which is kind of cool. And I think he does a really good job with that. That's a great book. I
will maintain that you're hard pressed to find a short novel as good as Cannery Row and a long novel as good as East of Eden. Yeah.
No, I would agree with you. I'm sure we'll talk about more about this, but I read this book and I was really pleasantly surprised because it read really well and it held up. I mean, even despite the fact that it was set so long ago, I found the humor held up. I found the story in and of itself held up. I mean, change a few things, you could make this a fairly modern story as well. And it was written in just in such a simple, easy way to read. I think it's Steinbeck's a real treasure, and I'm just finding that out now. I guess something that a lot of people already knew for a long time.
Well, let me give listeners some setup of the novella. It's a series of vignettes or episodes of different characters all living in or near Cannery Row in Monterey, California, somewhere near the end of World War II or post World War II. Prohibition has ended. I don't think we get an exact date, but we get post World War II. Description I've heard Mary Hemingway use to describe her husband's work, that it's poetry written as prose, and I think that fits this work's style. It to me, it's a poem. It's even an odd love poem to Doc, who we will talk about, and his fellow denizens of Cannery Row. Cannery Row is a poverty-stricken, unsavory side of Monterey Bay. Steinbeck's opening sentence kind of captures that, it says poem right in it, captures that poetry idea. Cannery Row in Monterey, California is a poem, a stink, a grating noise, a quality of light, a tone, a habit, a nostalgia, a dream. And the book then works to vivify each of those claims. Doc's a marine biologist, and maybe not quite the protagonist, but the book always seems to circle back to him and the idea that he's good-hearted and decent and admired and that people would like to do something nice for him, which takes us to what amounts to a plot in the book. We're as close as we're going to get to one. Mac and the boys, group of not quite transient men who live in a flop house near the canneries, just across from Doc's laboratory, want to throw him a party. And that's about, unless I'm missing something, I think that covers as much plot as we get. And
multiple parties.
Yes.
Hey, a party that doesn't go well, so let's throw another party to fix that party. It was pretty
We'll
how
fix.
it,
you know what? When something goes wrong, the best
Yeah.
way to fix it is to do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Ryan, you're the master of short fiction. Have anything to add about how this story works?
I mean, I think you're being fairly liberal with that word master, but I appreciate it. I do think it's important that while Doc is our hero figure, you know, he's up on the pedestal for everyone else in the community. He's also a pretty serious functional alcoholic, you know, who's got his own flaws. He just happens to be the best of the worst, so to speak. But as far as the book goes, I actually sent a text last night that I was laughing and kind of smiling while you were talking, Jeff number 2, that said, you know, for a book written in 1945, like short some language, it holds up really well. You know, I could still see it and I could still imagine it, and you could change a few turns of phrase here or there, and it would work in any modern day setting. They're really timeless characters. And I think that was one of the things that really, as far as short fiction goes, or as a bunch of vignettes goes, really helps, because there was never a point where you got out of the story because of some sort of technological advancement, or, you know, there's no references to things that would have felt out of touch or out of time. Even, you know, Doc playing a record player, which may be the most tech heavy thing in the book, still feels like it's right. Like if I think about somebody who's, you know, living that lifestyle now, is probably someone who just appreciates vintage records. And so I thought that was really great. He keeps everything kind of short and sweet. It's really moving. It's really snappy, even though not very much actually happens. So you always feel like you're moving forward, but really nothing is happening. And I think that's kind of the point, is nothing really changes in this area of the cannery. It just repeats itself. There's a character that really kind of stood up to me, and it's just, I want to say an older Chinese man who walks out to the water and disappears for the day and then comes back. And that's he just kind of appears occasionally throughout the book as he's walking through town, and they can hear his flip-flops. And at one point, a little boy is taunting him. But nothing, that's it. Like nothing really is happening throughout the whole thing. They're all just living in their daily life, like a lot of us are. And I think that keeps it really interesting as far as short fiction. You could almost take any one or two given chapters and just publish them on their own. And correct me if I'm wrong, is it Steinbeck who did do that? He wrote some stories for magazines. Did I read that?
Yes, he did.
So he might have had kind of that attitude where I'm going to publish this section as a chunk and then try to serialize it and get it going. And then this is kind of the end result of it.
They're all living in this cycle, but none of them seem, I mean, we can kind of look at it with our lens and say they're trapped in this cycle, but none of them seem to feel trapped. At least most of them don't seem trapped. This is life, and they make them, and most of what their life is, we would find, despicable is not the right word, but less than fulfilling. But that's their pattern, and they've fallen into their pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think what would, you know, if you take that nowadays, because really each of the group of characters, you could write a book just about them, right? You could write a book about the market. You could write a book about just Doc. You could write a book just about the Palace Flop House and Grill, you know, and then there's so many other ones that you could just. I thought it was really funny. One of the, like I said, where I just kind of laughed out loud was there's the character the Malloys, who kind of just move into the pipes that have been just discarded out there, and then they proceed to start charging rent for the other ones. And then as they start charging rent for the other pipes, now the guy's a landlord, and the wife then starts asking for things, and I want this and this and this, and then at the end, you know, it's like, I want curtains, and he's like, well, we have no windows, you know. But it was just so I just, like I said, like that could be a funny story, just those people in their life and how they grew into becoming these landlords and stuff. So
I wrote a little note to myself. We've talked a little bit about Doc already, but my note was, who is the main character in this book? is it Mac and the boys? But it kind of feels like the cannery itself is the character, and everything else is just happening in that setting. And something you just said made me think about how I wonder how this book would change if it was written from the perspective of somebody who lived on the hill up where the nicer market was.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about this is there's very little judgment, if any, of any of these characters' flaws throughout the book. Maybe occasionally, judging each other, but very much in an accepting sort of way. And I think that would be a really interesting, if we could when we have the technology and we can bring Steinbeck back, if we could ask him to rewrite the book, but from the perspective of the people up on the hill.
Their weaknesses and their flaws are laid open to us, but you're right, it's without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, think about the character of like Dora, right? So she runs the brothel, but she's also the person that pays for everybody's stuff, like meals and all that during the Depression. She donates to all of the, things that are going on in the town, any type of fundraising thing she does, and it's just like you said, it's without judgment. They just exist, and she's an integral part of that society, on that side of the tracks. But also, she might be the bridge between the two.
There definitely seems some setups where Steinbeck left himself the opportunity to write another short novel. Gay, who's the magical car
brilliant
mechanic, and
the
car breaks to their Model T. I did feel like I could fix a Model T by reading the book. That was another one of the tech pieces, but it made it seem so simple. I'm like, well, of course, who doesn't have a Model T in the backyard they've been waiting to get to? But when he has to hitch a ride to go get a carburetor needle, and it says, and the fates did not want him to go on this trip, and he ends up in jail for 180 days or something. But it just gives you this little snippet of, this is a story I'll come back to someday.
Yeah, and it's a bummer that they did, because he was one of my favorite characters. Just the couple of parts about him in jail. They talk about how he gets into it with his wife, right? And so he gets thrown into jail, but he does it on purpose to get away from her. And then they upgraded the jail so nice that now he doesn't want to get out. So now she won't call the police on him anymore, because she knows he'll go there, or then that second one where he's in the jail, and then he makes an arrangement with the sheriff to get out to go to the party. I think it was the second party at that point. And the sheriff lets him do it because he doesn't want him to talk bad about the jail, because he's going to run because he's up for re-election, and that could affect his re-election. Like, I was pretty, just the time, but it was a funny character if you could think about all of that in almost like a sitcom or a television show type of thing.
True. We get these episodes, these side stories like we're talking about now, but we have this main plot. Again, that's too specific. We have this meandering plot of Mac and the boys really want to throw Doc a party, but woven into all that, we get these extra little stories. We get these passages or lines that just made me sit up straight and go, wait, what was that? Let's pay a little more attention to that line. But what were some of those lines or passages you ran across that had you sit up straight and pay attention?
I can go first on that one. I mean, one of them was, I would just the description, the initial description of Mac, which I think is great. That there should be either a band or a brewery or something called Mac and the Boys. Mm-hmm. And they could brew at the Palace Flophouse and Grill. But anyways, the description, I think it was like on page 9 of the book I had, it says, where they're describing, because it's always Mac and the Boys, that Mac was the elder, leader, mentor, and to a small extent, the exploiter of a little group of men who had in common no families, no money, and no ambitions beyond food, drink, and contentment. But whereas most men in their search for contentment destroy themselves and fall wearily short of their targets, Mac and his friends approached contentment casually, quietly, and absorbed it gently. And I just thought that was kind of a cool description. And it was basically, and that's kind of how they led their lives, is that simple. It's a simple thing. And as you said, there wasn't really this want of more. They handled whatever came to them. They were content with it, whether it was free alcohol from there, or, whatever, catching frogs, the whole thing through it, everything always seemed to work out for them. Sometimes, they had to put a little pressure here or there, but it all worked out for them. They got their flop house. They started to decorate it. And so I thought that was just kind of an interesting, that needing needing little to be so happy. I guess you are content in who you are and where you are. I thought was kind of a cool thing.
And they're not afraid to, if it's not nailed down, to take something that's not theirs.
Yeah.
And then they had a little plan for that. They just painted everything bright red.
Yeah.
So when the owner would come, they'd say, well, this is red. Yours wasn't red, was it?
Right. Or I liked how they got the flop house to begin with is they go to the grocer and says, is that your property? And wouldn't it be terrible if something bad happened to it? How about if you let us stay there and we'll make sure nothing happens to it, you know? And then go ahead.
Most gentle exploitation of, we can watch that for you so nothing bad happens.
Yeah.
And then it talks about Chong Li's thinking this through like a chess match.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell them no, and I'm going to get a broken window. And then they're going to come back and offer again. And then I'm going to get two broken. And he can foresee how Mac and the boys are going to twist his arm eventually. So he just says, it's yours.
Yeah. And I think ultimately he wins in the long run, because not only do they take care of it and protect it and protect the area, but they end up spending all their money at his store. So, you know, the chess game in the long run, I think he wins it.
All right.
Ryan, what was the passage that stood out to you?
I had a few passages that stood out. I did love the entire first 2 pages. I texted you both right after, just saying, how have I not heard about this book before? Because the language just felt so perfect, and my preference for kind of stripped down elaboration. It's very visual. But there was one stopped me on right around page 80, 81, where he's referring to time, and it's kind of the morning time in the Cannery area, the gray time after light has come, but before sun has risen. It's the intervals between day and night, where time stops and examines itself, is a phrase that he uses. And when I read that, my brain jumped to a whole nother author, which is Neil Gaiman. And I feel like Neil Gaiman read that line and created an entire career of books around that one line, that the interval between day and night when time stops. And it is true that it is a very magical kind of moment where you feel things could happen that maybe wouldn't happen in the bright light of day. So I really loved that. One that has maybe a little more heft and weight to it, on page 35. It's this scene where a young kid is that's later on, but on 35 there's a line that says he only beat her up to keep his he only beat her up to keep his self-respect. And that made me wonder, what things do we do to keep our self-respect that maybe we wouldn't want to do, or we feel like we shouldn't do, but we do anyway, because there's this culture built around, especially masculinity, about being respected. And later on, I made a note, I mentioned it already, the child taunting the Chinese man. He doesn't really want to, he's afraid of this situation, but he feels like if he doesn't say something, this man walking through his neighborhood with his awkward, loud flip-flops, somehow he'll feel disrespected that he didn't say something, even as a small child. And that really sent me down kind of a path of thinking about how early, especially young men, are taught about this concept of respect, and alternatively, young women, how they are taught about respect. And that's it's a fraught topic, but it wouldn't surprise me that a 9-year-old boy would feel disrespected, or feel like he had to throw a stone or to make a comment, even if it wasn't really what he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then that action continually gets reinforced because there's a bunch of other 9-year-old boys who are feeling the same way. We should have done it and we didn't. So now he's at the top of that hierarchy. And so
like a need to establish a pecking order.
Yeah, there was a lot of those lines throughout the whole book that felt like they could have gone off onto a whole nother really deep kind of in-depth emotion. And the one thing I took from the whole book is that it's truly a book about avoidance, because he never does that.
Mm-hmm.
He touches the surface of a topic that's so intense like that, but he never makes it the focus of the book. It's more about, well, that's just part of the day, and then here's what happened after that.
And then he has back the I think that was Gay, the guy who says he only beat her up to keep his self-respect, but the backstory
Right.
is she beats him up all the time, and every once in a while he fights back to someone must be mocking him. At some
Right.
place he's feeling like this has gone on too long. He fights back once in a while to keep his respect. I shouldn't laugh at that. It's not funny.
Well,
But-
then the question is he trying to keep his respect from his wife, who is saying, what kind of man wouldn't fight back
Right.
if I'm hitting him? Or is it from like his buddies who are making
Yeah.
fun of him for, getting beat up by his wife? And I
Right.
think I took it the second way, but maybe it was the first way.
I love that it can be both. And then he goes and hides in the jail from her.
Right.
I'll be honest, this jail doesn't sound that bad. I have not been.
We'll have
But
to
if
check
it's
with
like
Joe
that-
on the quality of. He's our expert on
Yes,
quality of
he's-
jails.
Yes, that's
Mm.
true.
Were there some of those side stories and that you can think of that kind of stayed with you, or we talked about earlier, like you almost could see them playing out into another story? What were some of those side stories that really stuck with you as intriguing, or you wish there was more on?
I think the whole trip to get the frogs was kind of funny. You know how it kind of just evolved, and they get.
Let
to
me
that
give a little the backstory on
Go
that.
ahead.
So,
Yeah.
in order to throw the party, Mac and the boys have no money. They really want to throw a party for Doc. Well, Doc's a marine biologist and a scientist. He needs frog specimens, so he tells Mac and the boys, "Hey, look, he doesn't know it's supposed to be a surprise party, but they're not very good at this." He says, "Go get me some frog samples. Go get me a few hundred frogs, and I'll pay you for them." So off they go. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was saying, but they don't have a car or truck, so then they are going to go borrow the truck from Lee. But Lee is first, like, I can't do that, and they're like, well, we'll fix your truck for you. And then they acquire the truck, but there's no gas. So then they go back to Doc and say, "Hey, we need some gas for the truck." It's just like you can just see this being a great like movie. I mean, almost like all the steps of that, And then they get the truck and they're driving and they've got like this plan. Well, first they try to swindle the gas from the guy at the gas station, saying, "Oh, Doc gave us a thing for 10 gallons. How about if you give us 5 gallons now and just put 5 in this can over here so they could probably sell it?" And the guy's like, "No, Doc already told us you were going to ask for that. We're putting all 10 gallons in." And then that's where they start to drive up, and then they break down. And so then Gay goes to try and find his, thing to fix it. And so they lose him at that point. But then they proceed to make it out to, the spot that they are. And they start to find all these frogs. And then they find out they're on private property. And the guy shows up with his dog and his shotgun. But then again, Max smooth talks his way out, talking how great he is with dogs and this and that. And they proceed to have a whole, evening of debauchery and drinking. Wake up the next morning and the guy's passed. Oh, actually, the guy wants to leave with him now. He's like, "Yeah, I'm ready to head off with you guys. I want to move into the flop house with you guys." But they end up leaving with a dog. They got a dog out of it, and like I said, it just what an adventure. And that was just a whole side little story to pick up some frogs. So,
and that's really where you saw the magic of Mac, because we've heard that Mac has this gift of just being able to read other humans. And he works the captain. The captain comes to chase them off, and he's, "Yes, sir. We didn't see the sign." He's like, "How did you not see the sign? There's signs everywhere." "Well, sir, we didn't see the signs. Is that a pointer? Is that a pointer dog? Does she got something wrong with her shoulder? Were you in the military?" And he sweet talks that guy. The next thing you know, they're in his house drinking his whiskey. He's packing them whiskey to go. He's set them up with a sweet frog situation.
Yeah. Took him to the best place for frogs. Exactly.
Yeah. And at the end of it, Hazel, one of the Flophouse crew, says, "I bet Mac could have been president of the United States if he wanted." And one of the other guys says, "What would he do with it if he had it? There wouldn't be no fun in that." And that kind of, he could be a politician. Mac could do anything. But Mac has found his contentment in where he's at, which it has its own irony, because Mac realizes everything he touches turns to shit.
Yeah.
He's fully aware of that.
Yeah.
But he's found contentment with that.
But he's only aware of it in retrospect.
True.
And it doesn't stop him
Interesting.
from moving forward on making similar choices and thinking things could turn out differently. He's an optimist in that regard. Even though he'll acknowledge up front that it probably won't work out, he's still going to do it. because what if it doesn't? What if it does work out? And we've been talking a lot about some fun things that have been going on, but this is not a happy story either. And I think it's easy to get kind of caught up in the joy of some of these funny side tributaries to the story, so to speak. But you know, the book starts out kind of like with a suicide, and
Right.
later in the story there's another death, and there's a lot of sadness. And like Steinbeck does with avoiding judgment, he also avoids ignoring the reality that this is not an easy life for people necessarily in this area of the cannery. And he doesn't compare it necessarily to other groups of people, either higher class or even lower class or whatever, but he just presents it as a image of this is what this place's life is like. And I can imagine, from a writing perspective, sitting in that area, sitting, somewhere and just kind of watching the whole scene. And it almost feels like he's this kind of omniscient, silent observer. But there are a lot of sad stories. The story of the young boy, Frankie, who's learning disabled, really hit me pretty hard. And he looks up to Doc, and then, at the end, he tries to steal something to give to Doc as a gift and gets caught. And instead of helping him or doing anything else, Doc agrees, he probably should just put him away because, his life's already kind of shit, so to speak.
That was the hardest part of the book for me, right? When Doc turns his back on that boy with the mental disabilities and whatever else he's got going on. And Doc, you can tell Doc's not comfortable with it, but he's a scientist. He's thinking logically.
Yeah.
He's got to be put away for his own safety.
And then Doc has his own moment where he sees something while he's out. Do we always tell people that we have spoilers? I don't know if we do that. We probably should.
We will. Yes. I was even going to, when we get to the ending, saying, look, if we've talked you into reading this book, pause.
Well,
go read it. It won't take very long. It's a itty bitty little thing.
Yeah. But Doc has his own moment where he sees something tragic that affects him, and you wonder, would it have affected him if he hadn't had that experience with Frankie? And it just shows how connected everyone is in very kind of simple, practical. This is a day or a week or a month or a year in the life of the cannery, and then through it all, it just shows how all of these people are trying to avoid kind of their own reality, and or choose not to see the truth. They may know it, but they may not want to acknowledge it because it would make them sad. And I think that is one of the reasons I felt the book really held up, because more than ever, the masses kind of want to be led astray in avoiding seeing the gravity and reality of the situation. And I think all of us, having lived through the past year, and seeing, the political environment, or people who believe in climate issues or don't believe, class issues, race issues, I think we all kind of want to avoid seeing reality sometimes. And these characters in the cannery spend all of their time avoiding reality, which I thought really resonated. Even now, 80 years later.
It hits them hard. So they throw a party for Doc. They make some mistakes, as you'd expect the Flophouse guys to do. Biggest mistake, I think we could agree, is they started the party before Doc got there.
Yeah, start hitting
and
the
finished
alcohol
it before he got there. And ruined his house, laboratory, in the mix. And for that, one of the realities they face, because they do kind of live in this fantasy outliers world, is the social ostracism they face. And Steinbeck writes of that. Mac and the boys, no one will talk to them. No one really liked them, but no one disliked them. They were just part of the scenery, part of Cannery Row. But this brings the heat of the community on them. He says there are two possible reactions to social ostracism. Either a man emerges determined to be better, purer, and kindlier, or he goes bad, challenges the world, and does even worse things. This last is by far the commonest reaction to stigma. Mac and the boys balanced on the scales of good and evil. And they've got to make some new. They know they can't change. Mac knows everything he touches turns to shit. In retrospect, that's a really good insight, Ryan. And here they are on those scales, and they decide, nope, we need to throw a party again, and this time we need to do it right. Whatever right means, they really can't define right.
Well, they haven't experienced right. They don't know for sure, but they are confident that it will work out. And in his private moments, Max seems to acknowledge that he's not so confident, but he doesn't want to let the other guys see that.
Yeah, that makes him very human. Doc brings that out of him. Doc really has studied Mac. He talks to one of his friends who's visiting, and they have a whole conversation about Mac and the boys. And I thought I hadn't remembered that was part of the book in this reread, so I was very intrigued by that. They spend the whole day watching him through the window, watching Mac and the boys, not watching the parade, and betting on whether or not they'll look over at the parade. Doc's friend says no one can resist watching a parade.
Right.
He says these guys can because they already know what will happen. and he lists out, because Doc knows too exactly what will happen, including that Mac and the boys won't even turn from sitting on their tubes looking out at the bay. And that leads Doc to this insight that Steinbeck sneaks into Doc's voice. The things we admire in men, kindness and generosity, openness, honesty, and understanding and feeling, are the concomitants of failure in our system. And those traits we detest, sharpness, greed, acquisitiveness, meanness, egotism, and self-interest, are the traits of success. And while men admire the quality of the first, they love the produce of the second. And that's
what was that word again, Jeff?
Oh, I don't think it's a word I've never, co-committity. I think co-committity is closer than I got the first time. That these things that are good, that we know are good, really don't interest the common man when we're looking for profit and we're looking for material success and we're looking for the things we've identified as success. Mac and the boys, not that interested in it.
Just survival. Steinbeck really takes a lot of care. This was something I really appreciated, to describe those kind of innocuous little events that most might discard, which feels, it's not a small sacrifice because it is such a short book, but you really can visualize these little things. Like he'll take extra moments to describe kind of, he'll set the scene. Everyone waved to the train. That's way past. He'll take time to set that scene. And in a book as short as this, you can tell that he must have slaved over those words or really cared about he must have felt that they were essential, because he could have easily made the book longer and included, different descriptions, but the ones that he chose really all told two stories. It wasn't just the description of what it looked like, but it also led you to an emotion about the character that he was describing or the scene. He does, and this is something I learned recently, a callback. Have you guys heard of this?
Yeah.
Did he call back to another show?
Yep.
People in books, but in our podcast, we reviewed, or we talked about the book, The Cactus League. And in that book, the author has a bunch of kind of philosophical interludes, which don't really fit with the story. But Steinbeck does a little bit of that too in here, where he'll have an entire 2 pages that are kind of these philosophy with no real characters. But it doesn't strike me in a bad way here the way it did with that book.
Doesn't seem as out of place.
No, and he doesn't do it as often, but he does do it.
And it's crafted down to a level of you can't let go of it. You can't not read it. We're in the Cactus League. I was kind of like, wow, how long are we going to talk about the rock formations?
Yeah.
And this one, I'm like, there's a gopher. What's this gopher up to?
Yeah.
Which is far less interesting to me typically than rock formations. Gophers. And of course, Grapes of Wrath, every other chapter is sort of that poetic, philosophic waxing. And then you get back to plot in the next chapter, which he wrote before this. So let's look at the ending then here as we get toward our back quarter of our show. So again, if we have inspired you to read Cannery Row, this is where you want to pause, come back and hear the rest. because we're going to talk about the ending, and I also want to hear about that Artifacts beer. So the ending has sort of a three-pronged ending. They throw the party the second time, trying to get it right, and they got the whole town involved, including people not in the town. Anyone who's ever talked to anyone knows there's a party at Doc's house again, because who doesn't like a surprise party in your own home? Then we get this chapter, like Ryan was just talking about, of a gopher cruising along through the through the grass. And then we get this final closing scene, what I might call the aftermath of the party. But first, let's hear about this Artifacts beer.
This Artifacts beer is phenomenal. It is just a very classic IPA, and it's got a bunch of information on it. But all I will say is if you're out there and you're looking for a good IPA, this Artifacts is a great place to start.
I've had some really good IPAs lately. Summer must be arriving.
I also did buy a 6-pack of Mother Earth Buku IPA, which I'm pretty excited about trying here locally as well. I did make my trip to the liquor store worth the effort.
That's good.
Considering I hadn't been, I did have a very full trunk.
I was wondering if this all fit on your bike.
Yes.
No, not today. Time today is of the essence.
Okay. All right. So I like to picture it was all balanced all around your bike handlebars. And
I don't have to do that. I'm old enough now where I bought a whole rolling cart to pull behind me for the big liquor store purchases.
Nice.
So
they go, look at the cute baby. Oh, it's beer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I can comfortably fit 3 cases in my little trailer.
Oh, that's sweet. We want a picture of that.
Or 1 keg.
All right. So chapter 30, 31, and 32. I'm going to read the first sentence of each of those because I think they set up the discussion. So chapter 30, the nature of parties has been imperfectly studied. It is, however, generally understood that a party has a pathology, that it is a kind of individual, and that it is likely to be very perverse individual. And then we get this long anticipated party. Chapter 31, a well-grown gopher took up residence in a thicket of mallow weeds in the vacant lot in Cannery Row. It was a perfect place. And then we get somehow a gopher's perspective. And the final chapter 32, Doc awakened very slowly and clumsily like a fat man getting out of a swimming pool. His mind broke the surface and fell back several times. And then we get in the aftermath. Doc wakes up to the mess. What did you think of? We've always come back. We always like to do our critique of the ending. What'd you make of this ending?
Oh, I mean, I found it. It was well. I think it in some ways it kind of got. If you're looking at that, we've been talking about this. Is that this is almost just a snapshot of life on Cannery Row. That some way the ending was appropriate. It was just kind of like this snapshot is ending, but life is continuing. Nothing's really changed, and it's just continuing on. And so I thought it worked for it. I didn't even feel like I was like, well, I wish for something. I mean, it seemed like appropriate at the time, and it'd be like, okay, we would wait for the next snapshot to find out what happens next time if that were to happen. If someone was to continue the story, but at the time, it really kind of flowed into that idea of we're just seeing things that are going on in Cannery Row.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I thought it was. We used the word vignettes earlier, but it almost feels like a collection of experiences that they kind of bundled together, and there's no expectation that those experiences will end, but we don't necessarily need to know more to know what life is like in that community, in that neighborhood. I did just have, I'm going to look this up real quick, maybe while you give your thoughts on the ending, Jeff, but I was wondering, maybe one of you guys already knows, if there are more modern books or movies or TV shows that were inspired by this story, because it feels like this kind of storytelling of a community really could fit on another medium.
So certainly the tourism around Cannery Row plays on its Steinbeck's influence. Made a couple trips up there. The gopher chapter, which has always thrown me off, and the couple times I've taught this book, it's been one that I kind of let the students run wild with, but Ryan, you mentioned the need for a couple characters to sort of establish this pecking order. And that's what happens to the gopher. He makes a perfect gopher home, and no lady gophers come, and he has to cross into another field where there's a bull gopher that teaches him that this is not his place, and he's off, ostracized from gopher world. um, that gave me a way to rethink that chapter. I'm going to have to, I call it thinker. I'm going to have to thinker around with that idea of the pecking order and how that plays into that gopher. I think I both love and am very saddened by the picture of Doc waking up to clean up his own party. It happened again. The first one cost him a bundle. This one cost him a bundle. This time he knew it was coming. So he bought the food. He bought the drinks. He hid everything breakable. He had a great time. It had everything a party should: dancing, fighting, drinking. But he's got to pay for it. And he kind of feels like a hangover when he wakes up. And he thinks, if we have too many of these parties, I'm going to go broke. I'm going to lose the laboratory. And we are certain the success of that party means there's more coming, right?
It's going to have more, yes.
Oh yeah, that's going to be expected now. But he seems to, I think the fact that he knew it was coming and was able to prepare, he at least got the benefit of enjoying it.
He enjoyed this party, yes.
That was something that was very different about the time period. At the parties, or we mentioned earlier, Gay getting out of the jail. At the party, at one point, the police show up, and then they deal with the situation, but then they end up joining the party,
right?
And that's something that's fairly hard to imagine in our current world. But it kind of does harken back to a time where the police weren't this kind of militarized outfit; they were just members of your community that were making sure everything's okay. Everything's okay. And that seems to be the case. They were human just like everyone else, and that might be a good little thing to keep in mind, that we're all just people. But we're filling these roles similar to Mac and the Boys, or Dora at the brothel, or the shopkeeper, and we all have kind of a part to play in this collective, which I think is using the word collective makes me feel smart. So I'm going to try to do that more often.
And then they make some arrangements, like the girls of the brothel, because the brothel has to stay open because they're aware that things will go bad if the brothel closes. Money will be lost, but things will go bad. So they work in shifts, and the bouncer's feeling a little left out. So they make him a deal. Look, there'll be an appropriate time for you to come over too. So that they make sure that everyone who's part of Doc's life gets a chance to go eat his food and drink his booze and dance to his records. And they do it in the most loving way. They're totally taking advantage of him. And not one of them can see that. It's a party for Doc. And he's smart enough to enjoy it, I think.
But he also knows that he has his place in the community is one that is looked up to. And he might appreciate that role and know that if he left, because I do think that if he left for a different neighborhood, he probably wouldn't have that same standing that he does here, where he's kind of the expert. He's the one that everyone looks to, and there's something to be said for that too.
The image of him is about the last page of the book, making a peanut butter sandwich with a cold beer, listening to a record as his way of healing from the big party. Yeah, I could relate to that. That sounds like a perfect way for a day after.
How often do you have beer for breakfast, Jeff?
Oh, not for breakfast, but about noon with a peanut butter sandwich. And by noon, I mean 11.
Sure. Yeah. It feels like Doc does have a lot of breakfast beers. I mean, I'm all for a breakfast beer on occasion, but he's more of a regular breakfast beer kind of guy.
He picks up, because he's got that long drive from Monterey to La Jolla. So he picks up people that need a ride to have a little company, which oddly he wants someone who doesn't talk. But he gets the teetotaler who says, look, if you have another beer and drive, I'm going to call the police. And he throws that guy out.
He throws him out. Yeah.
I got no use for you. That's when I realized he's very sensitive about his drinking. Yes. Interesting. That road trip, though, just eating burgers and drinking beer all the way down. That sounded all right. I don't eat burgers, but it sounded good the way they're and getting a shake. Oh, he created the milkshake IPA in the book.
That's exactly.
That's right.
I just remembered that.
He was way ahead of
first
his time.
hazy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He orders a milkshake IPA. He gets the idea of what would a milkshake beer taste like, and then he has a girl make one at a restaurant.
But he's embarrassed. He doesn't want to do it in his own neighborhood.
Right.
And that's kind of how I feel
Yeah.
about drinking hazy IPAs too.
Yeah, I get the idea that maybe ordering a milkshake IPA is something you want to do outside of your neighborhood brewery or bar. Yeah.
This might not be the right forum, but the very first time I ever drank alcohol in my entire life was at a party at, I can tell you her name, Sandy B's house. And I had a group of friends there who all got much drunker than I did. I was very responsible. And at some point in the evening, I'm not sure why they were doing it. I think maybe in an effort to try to keep their self-respect, somebody said, I bet you won't drink a beer milkshake.
Uh-oh.
And of course, somebody said, well, I bet you I will. And the next thing you knew, a group of gentlemen everyone was in the kitchen watching, and they were drinking natural light beers with a scoop of mint chocolate chip ice cream.
Interesting.
And they would swear to this day, I bet, that they loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it.
And they're all liars.
Yes. I did at Deschutes. We've talked about Deschutes before at the Deschutes Brewery. No, excuse me. I'm near the Deschutes Brewery. It was the Deschutes Porter at the lodge at Sun River. I did have a porter float. And it was quite good, but not as good as having the ice cream on the side and the porter in a glass. It was good. It would have been better just having them separate.
So as we're getting closer to the end, do we have another book yet? I haven't picked anything up.
Well, this one actually I just got a couple days ago. It was passed along to me, and it came extremely highly recommended. And now I'm reading some of the stuff on the back, and it sounds like it could be a really interesting book. It's called Barbarian Days: A Surfing Life. William Finnegan is the author. Basically, it's his memoir of his obsession with surfing. But to give you an idea, it says, reading this guy on the subject of waves and water is like reading Hemingway on bullfighting. So that's from Sports Illustrated.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So, and then the other one is another one of my favorite books. It actually says, and this is from the New York Times Magazine. It says, similar to John Krakauer's Into the Wild. It's basically, again, it's just it's an adventure story and a young man's, and I think it's going to take a lot of kind of growing up here in California, Hawaii, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm interested to write it. Everybody who's read it or read it. Everyone who's read it said it's a fantastic book. So I'd like to put that out there if you guys are interested.
Barbarian Days by Finnegan.
Yeah, by William Finnegan.
It's a small coincidence, but I have that book sitting on my counter because I got it out of a local lending library.
Well, there we go.
The other day.
That is, I don't know what you call that, but that means that's the book we're reading.
Okay. So it's just up to me. I'm just going to look around. Maybe I have a copy.
Yeah.
Got a whole pile of books over here. No. Okay. I'll find a copy though. Hey, thank you guys for indulging me in this month's read. Looking forward to Barbarian Days. And it seems like a perfect start to summer book too.
Yeah, that's a
nice
good
choice.
timing wise. It seems like a good one. Yeah.
Well, and I have jury duty next week, so I'm going to need something to do.
So you
I
will
hope.
finish it quickly.
That said, Jeff Spanier, I really wanted to say thank you for introducing me to this book, because I think of all the books that we've read for this book club and the other one we're part of, this has been my favorite so far.
Well, you're welcome.
Yeah,
and
no, I
and
agree.
side note, I read this book during jury duty one time many years ago.
Nice.
About 20 years ago.
And I'm not sure how it works. I mean, I think they're still on COVID protocol for jury duty. So I have to phone in at nighttime, and then I have to essentially wait by the phone for about a week to see if I'm called. But they weren't clear on if that means I have to go down to the courthouse or if I could watch it on Zoom, or I don't really know what's happening. So,
Well, it's a tight
it'd be
run
an
ship
experience.
Yeah, it seems
with the
seems like
judges and the gavels and whatnot.
Yeah.
I filled out a survey and I said all kinds of terrible things. Like I'm probably not going to be good at this job.
Yeah.
Actually, I have been called for jury duty 3 times since moving to California. And my wife has not been called once. So I did call down there to ask if she could go.
Yeah.
But they said that's not how
She
that
probably
works.
appreciated that.
I get called once a year. I have never been put on a jury. I I made it close to the cut one time. I wouldn't even mind doing it once. I might hate it, never want to do it again. But
yeah, I've done it once. I've had it several times, but I did make it to a jury once. So, and I'll tell you the most frustrating part about that is it was a civil suit, extremely boring. But I did my duty, and we sat there for 5+ days taking copious notes. We even got into the jury room for like an afternoon and began to deliberate. And then we were going to finish up the next morning, or actually we might even come to a thing, and they were in the morning, and then got a call because that was pre-email, and got a call and said, "Hey, we don't need you anymore." They settled. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
The one time I got into the thing where they were asking questions of everyone, picking the selection, I was up there with everyone to see if it was good. And the one question was, I'm answering all the questions. Everything seems to be going well. Can I be, unbiased? Yes, I can. And they said, well, do you know anybody else, in the courtroom today? And I said, well, the prosecutor is the pitcher on my softball team. And then they threw me out of there.
There you go. So that's the secret.
Listeners, stash
Yeah.
that away.
Yeah,
True
yeah.
or not true?
If you ever want to get off.
Join your local prosecution softball team, and you'll never get picked for a jury.
Well, thank you guys. I'm looking forward to the next read. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.